Hi, Anna Sester here from I Dig Dead People. I'm bringing you some family history stories that you may find entertaining, and the purpose of my videos is to provide some interesting stories of other families and their history and how it relates to the larger history of our country at the same time. And my hope is that people will become interested in their own family history and start looking for their own ancestors. So this first story dates back to 2001 when I started doing genealogy research. I'm an historian, earning my degree in 2006 in history with a specialty in early American history. And I love researching genealogies, and I've done research for friends and other family as well. And one that I started way back when was my stepfather's. His family had a mystery they'd been unable to solve since the 1930s, and that was what happened to Allan W. Otley Sr. My stepfather, whose name I won't reveal for privacy reasons, was the son of Allan W. Otley II. And Allan, too, as we'll call him here, was born June 2nd, 1923 in Boston, Massachusetts. His parents were Allan W. Otley Sr. and Florence Whitten. Now, Allan Sr. and Florence were married in Greenville, Maine on July 15th, 1922, and I have a copy of their marriage record. Both had been living in Rockwood, Maine at the time of their marriage, and both were employed. The groom was 33 years old and the bride was 20. And some people might think, oh, that's a little weird, but for this time period, it wasn't uncommon at all. So let's take a closer look at this marriage record while I give you some information on the family. So unfortunately, the marriage of Allan Sr. and Florence did not last long, and in 1924, and then again in the 1930s, she was writing to several municipal agencies trying to locate Allan Sr. The family lore is that she was trying to get a divorce because she'd met someone else. And apparently, Allan Sr. and Florence had separated for some years, so she no longer knew where he was. In her personal papers was her marriage license, which my stepfather now has in his possession, and that's the copy we're looking at today. It's enough proof that we have the correct Allan Sr. since it was from the family. It's a family record. And the information on this marriage license will start us along a very mysterious path. Allan II last remembered seeing his father at about the age of 5 in Boston during a visit. His father put him on the train to return to his mother in Maine, and then he never saw his father again. So a few years later, his mother, Florence, is trying to find Allan Sr., and she's writing to his birthplace in Adams, Massachusetts, requesting a death record. So the question is, what happened to Allan Sr.? Up until the summer of 2017, the family had no answers, but plenty of speculation. Like maybe he got mixed up with the mob and had been killed, or maybe he assumed another identity and just started a whole nother life. So let's take a good look at the paper trail of Allan Sr. and try to figure out what happened to him. Through research, written requests, and travel, I found the documents we'll discuss here pertaining to Allan Sr. Based on information that Florence received from her request in 1924, Allan Sr. was born March 31st, 1887 in Adams, Massachusetts, to Grace Dunnigan and Thomas Otley. This is confirmed by his marriage record, and that led me to find his birth record in Adams, Massachusetts. Interestingly, you'll note that his birth record, which we have here, does not list his name as Allan, but as Alfred W. Otley. What's up with that? I mean, parents are the same, however, so we do have the right person. Perhaps Allan was a nickname for people named Alfred, or perhaps his parents, who were both from Scotland, had thick accents and that made Alfred sound like Allan. I don't know. Allan then shows up in the 1900 U.S. Census in Middlesex County, Massachusetts. He's with his parents, Thomas and Grace, along with some other family members. Interestingly, his name here is listed as Albert in this census. Now we have Allan, we have Alfred, and Albert. What's up with that? I wouldn't be surprised if Albert was born and then Dad went and registered him that day with the town clerk and called him Alfred, and then got home and Mom said, no, his name is Albert. We're just going to call him Al. We know it's still him because the parents' names, the ages, the birth countries match, Albert's birth date and birthplace match. So Al shows up 10 years later in the 1910 U.S. Census, still in Middlesex County, Massachusetts. He's with his father, his mother, and his siblings, and he's about 23 years old, and he's listed as Albert W. Otley. Now, I was unable to find him in the U.S. Census for 1920, but he does show up in other paperwork, so we haven't lost his trail. Albert Wilfred Otley, son of Thomas and Grace, married Janie W. McClary in Waltham, Massachusetts on June 27, 1912, and we have a copy of this marriage document. The marriage was short-lived, however. Janie died of endocarditis. Had to look that up, had no idea what that was. It's an inflammation of the heart, and she was pregnant at the time, so that's even today still fatal for a pregnant woman. So she died on September 19th, 1914, and we have a copy of her death record as well. They were married only 2 years. We see Al again on his World War I draft registration card as Albert W. Otley, and he completed that on June 4th, 1917. His birth date, his birthplace are the same, and he's living in Boston at the time. At some point after this, he makes his way to Maine and marries Florence in 1922. And since their son was born in Boston in 1923, they must have returned to Boston at some point after they were married. And then, by about 1924, Florence is back in Maine with her son, and Allan remained in Boston. Let's give you a little historical context about the 1920s in the U.S. This was a really prosperous time for people. Most people had a job. They were making money. A lot of Americans started being able to afford cars. So cars were much more common, which led to a little more privacy for people, you know, backseat of the car. You've got the speakeasies going because prohibition is in full swing. So alcohol was not allowed. People would go to a speakeasy to get alcohol. There was bootlegging, so people were transporting alcohol all over the country illegally. You had shorter skirts for the ladies and shorter hair. The bob was coming into style. So in 1924, Florence wrote the Boston City Clerk, and she requested birth information on Allan Sr., and she received her letter back with a typewritten response on the other side, and it provided Alfred W. Otley's date of birth and his parents' names, matching the information that we have. Then 10 years later, Florence writes Suffolk County, Massachusetts, inquiring if there's been a divorce filed for Al, and their response is negative. She also writes the City of Register of New Haven, Connecticut, that same year, inquiring about a death record for Al. That response is negative as well. So let's give you a little bit of historical context for the 1930s. This is the time that Florence is now really writing these letters trying to find Al. This may be because in 1929, the stock market crashed. And after that, the 1930s it's called the Great Depression. Financially, the country was doing terrible. People did not have money, high unemployment rates. You're talking about soup kitchen lines. People are standing in line for food. There's not enough money to feed your family. The farmers are having a terrible time. You got the Dust Bowl occurring in the Midwest and the West. So not a great time for people in the 1930s financially. This may be why Florence was really trying to find Al, because if she did have somebody she was wanting to marry, that would help her situation financially, especially with raising a child. So this may be why we're seeing more letters being written by Florence. With all this talk of documents and records, we can't forget that there was a small child involved in this whole scenario. Allan, too, hadn't seen his father since he was about 5. I actually think he may have been a little bit younger. By 1934, when his mom is writing these letters, he's 12, and his father is still missing, and has been missing for a while. His mother's trying to find him, probably in order to obtain a divorce and move on with her life. And she does eventually move on. She marries another man, but Allan, too, doesn't get along with him. And at the age of 17, he enlists in the Navy and is at Pearl Harbor when it's attacked on December 7th, 1941. He survives the attack and the war, and he goes on to marry and have children of his own. I knew this man as my grandfather, and I believe he probably went to his death thinking that his father had abandoned him as a child, that he just disappeared and didn't care about him and just moved on with his life and left his son behind. So as I said, I began researching Allan Sr. in 2001. I had no success in finding him in the record books after his marriage to Florence. It was as if he had disappeared off the face of the earth. So over the years, I would periodically search records online, see if anything new had been indexed, still no luck. Then in 2017, our family began planning a trip to Boston for a summer vacation. And on a whim, I decided to try and see where Al's parents were buried, Grace and Thomas. So maybe I could visit and get a picture of the gravestone. It would be a great thing to give to my stepdad, just some tangible evidence of his family, that these people actually lived, and they are buried in Waltham, Massachusetts. So I searched in Waltham and looked for cemeteries there and came across Mount Feake Cemetery. And they actually had an online search on their database. So I entered the name of Grace Otley. I picked her because she was the one who lived the longest, died last of the couple, and I figured that would probably make it a little easier to find her records. So I searched for Grace on Mount Feake's online database, and there she was. There was a record of her burial there. And also listed as buried with her were Thomas, her husband, and Arthur, which was another child that she had, and OMG, like Albert W. was buried there as well. I just about jumped out of my chair. I was ecstatic, and we have a picture of the gravestone here. Had we finally found Al? I ordered a copy of the death record for Massachusetts to verify we had the correct person, but I was pretty certain it was him. I mean, it says he was born in 1888, like our Al. He was buried with Thomas and Grace, his parents. This was our guy. And the death record did confirm it. It confirmed the names of his parents. It also listed him as the widower of Jane McClary, his first wife. What a great affirmation that we have the right guy. And now we had an end to the mystery. So Al, or Albert W. Otley, or Allan Otley, or Alfred Otley, he died on September 11th, 1933, at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, from complications of Hodgkin's disease, which is a type of cancer. His second wife, Florence, had written to several places, but she never wrote to Boston to request any records, especially a death record. Apparently, she didn't know her in-laws, nor they her, because Albert's mother, Grace, was alive at the time, and she was the informant on his death record. So she's the one who gave the information that he was a widower of Janie McClary. So she only knew about this first marriage. I'm suspecting she didn't know about Florence or about her grandson, Allan, too. So the irony is that if Florence had written to Boston, where her son had been born, she may have learned in 1934 that her husband had passed away already, and Allan too would have known that his father hadn't abandoned him, but had in fact died at the age of 46 of Hodgkin's lymphoma. After 83 years, the mystery of what happened to Allan W. Otley Sr. has been solved. Remember, don't ever give up on your genealogical mystery, your brick wall. New records come online all the time, and that record you need to solve that mystery, it may just one day appear. So if you enjoyed this video, I plan on making a bunch more. Click like and also click subscribe so you can see the next videos. You'll also want to hit the bell so that you get notifications. Great day. Thanks for watching our video. I'm Anna Sester, and I dig dead people.